seems like every week there's another massive data breach. Like last month, the PowerSchool hack impacted 60 million people. It's kind of crazy.
Right.
But today, we're going to deep dive into a breach you might not have heard much about. DISA Global Solutions.
Yeah. It hasn't gotten a ton of attention, which is surprising because DISA handles really sensitive employee screening data for like a third of the Fortune 500.
Yeah.
It's over 3.3 million people who could be affected.
So to be honest, I actually had to Google what DISA even does. They handle things like drug and alcohol testing and background checks.
Oh, yeah. All the fun stuff.
It's not exactly light reading. But going through it, I realized just how much sensitive data we hand over without even really thinking about it. And what's wild is this breach happened sometime between February 9th and April 22nd of this year. And get this, they didn't even discover it until April 22nd.
Wow, 2 months. That's a long time for a vulnerability like that to just be sitting there. It really raises some serious questions about their security practices. Like, did they even have basic intrusion detection systems in place? Were they monitoring their network for any suspicious activity? I mean, it's almost unbelievable in this day and age.
Right. It makes you wonder what systemic security flaws are common in companies like DISA that we should be looking out for with our own employers.
Yeah.
I mean, are they cutting corners? Or is this just a symptom of a bigger problem?
I think it's definitely a symptom of a larger issue. A lot of companies prioritize functionality and cost-cutting over having robust security measures. But you're right, it's super important for individuals to be aware of potential red flags. Like, is your company transparent about their data security practices? Do they have clear policies in place for handling sensitive data? Those are questions we should all be asking.
I'm already getting a little uneasy. And we haven't even gotten to the really sensitive stuff. Social security numbers, financial information, even government-issued IDs. All potentially compromised.
Yeah, that's the scary part. This isn't just about someone stealing your identity and opening a credit card in your name. With this combination of data, malicious actors could potentially gain access to your bank accounts, your medical records. I mean, who knows what else?
Okay, now I'm officially freaked out. So what is DISA actually doing about this mess? I mean, they contained the incident, brought in forensic experts, started notifying affected customers. But does any of that really make a difference after 2 months of exposure?
Bringing in forensic experts is standard procedure after a breach like this. They're basically digital detectives trying to figure out what happened, how the hackers got in, what data was accessed. Think of it like a CSI team for the internet.
So they're combing through the digital crime scene, dusting for fingerprints. Okay, I kind of like that analogy. But what does all this mean for the people whose data might be out there in the hands of cyber criminals?
Well, they're offering the standard 12 months of credit monitoring and identity theft protection through Experian. It includes $1 million in identity theft insurance. But honestly, that feels like a drop in the bucket compared to the potential damage.
Right. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. What can people do to protect themselves before the damage is done? Like freezing their credit, changing passwords, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Those are great first steps. Freezing your credit can prevent new accounts from being opened in your name. And creating strong, unique passwords for each of your online accounts is crucial.
And two-factor authentication everywhere, right?
Yes. Two-factor authentication adds that extra layer of security by requiring you to confirm your identity using a code sent to your phone or email.
It seems like everyone is pushing two-factor authentication these days. And to be honest, it used to feel like a hassle. But after digging into this DISA situation, I'm thinking maybe a little hassle is worth it for peace of mind.
It's a small price to pay for greater security. And remember, it's not just about protecting yourself. It's also about making it harder for cyber criminals to succeed.
So you're saying we need to up our game. But where do we even begin? There's just so much to worry about these days.
You're right. It can feel overwhelming. But taking small steps like enabling two-factor authentication and regularly checking your credit reports can make a big difference.
And the FTC website has some really great resources on this too, right? We could definitely link that in the show notes for anyone who wants to dive deeper.
Absolutely. The FTC website is a great resource for understanding your rights and learning practical steps to protect your data.
It's just kind of scary to think that even if you've never heard of DISA, your data could be at risk if your employer uses their services.
Yeah, that's the thing about data breaches. They have this ripple effect. You might not be a direct customer of the company that's been hacked, but your data could still be compromised. It just shows how interconnected our digital lives really are.
And to make things even more frustrating, DISA has been super vague about exactly what data was actually stolen. It's like they're playing a game of digital hide and seek.
Right. Their communication has been frustratingly opaque. They acknowledge a breach, but they kind of dance around the specifics.
Yeah, which leaves us hanging.
Right.
We're left in this limbo of not knowing the full extent of the risk.
Exactly. And the information we do have is pretty alarming. The Massachusetts Attorney General's filing mentions Social Security numbers, financial account info like credit card numbers, and even government-issued IDs.
Okay, so this is serious stuff. What kind of security measures did they even have in place? I mean, were they using encryption? Did they have any access controls to prevent unauthorized access?
That's the million-dollar question. Were they following industry best practices for data storage and access? Because from what we know so far, it doesn't look good.
Right. It's like they left the door wide open and invited the hackers in for a digital buffet.
Right.
And to make matters worse, they haven't revealed how the hackers even got into their systems in the first place.
Yeah, that's a critical piece of the puzzle. Was it a phishing attack? A software vulnerability? Or maybe even an inside job? Understanding how they broke in is crucial to preventing similar breaches in the future.
It's like solving a digital whodunit. And speaking of clues, those forensic experts should be uncovering some interesting details, right? Their findings will tell us how extensive the damage really is and shed some light on DISA's level of responsibility.
Those findings could have huge implications for DISA. We could be talking legal action from affected individuals, regulatory fines, and of course the massive reputational damage that comes with a breach of this magnitude.
Yeah, their whole business model is built on handling sensitive information responsibly. I mean, they talk a big game about security and trust on their website.
Exactly. And that's why this breach is so significant. It completely undermines the core of their business. It's a cautionary tale for any company that handles personal data, highlighting the importance of robust cybersecurity, employee training, and proactive threat detection.
It's a stark reminder that in today's digital world, it's not a matter of if you'll be targeted, but when they burn it. Companies can't afford to be complacent about cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And individuals need to be vigilant too. We have to protect our data and demand greater accountability from the companies we entrust with our sensitive information.
It's a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier,
Hmm.
companies need to step up their game, and individuals need to be proactive. But what does this all mean for DISA? I mean, the fallout from this breach is going to be significant, right?
Oh, absolutely. The financial costs alone could be substantial. Legal fees, settlements, credit monitoring for millions of people. But the damage to their reputation might be even harder to repair. It takes years to build trust and just seconds to lose it.
Especially in an industry like employee screening where trust is paramount.
Hmm?
Rebuilding that lost confidence is going to be a tough road for them.
Yeah.
This breach could have serious long-term implications for their business.
This whole situation raises some bigger questions about data security in our increasingly digital lives, doesn't it? Are we as a society doing enough to protect our most sensitive information? Are companies investing enough in cybersecurity? Are government regulations strong enough?
Those are some really important questions. It feels like we're constantly playing catch-up with cybercriminals, and the stakes are only getting higher.
And this DISA breach is just one example of a much larger problem, and it's not going away anytime soon. So what can we do about it? Well, for starters, we need to stay informed about the risks and take steps to mitigate them.
So being aware of the threats is the first step toward protecting ourselves. It's about taking sensible precautions, just like wearing a seatbelt.
Exactly. It's not about living in fear, but about taking reasonable steps to minimize risk. Things like being careful about what information you share online, creating strong passwords, and enabling two-factor authentication wherever possible. And don't forget about those phishing emails. Being wary of suspicious links and attachments can save you a lot of trouble down the line.
It's about finding that balance right. We want to enjoy the convenience and benefits of the digital world, but not at the expense of our privacy and security. We need to be smarter and more cautious.
Absolutely. And we also need to hold companies accountable for how they handle our data. We should demand greater transparency about data collection practices and security measures.
And we can support legislation that strengthens data protection regulations.
Yes, that's where our collective power comes in.
It's a lot to think about, right? This DISA situation really shows us how vulnerable our data is in this digital age.
It does, but the good news is we're not powerless. We can absolutely take steps to protect ourselves and advocate for change.
So let's bring it back to the listener. What can you actually do with all this information? It's easy to just feel overwhelmed and want to bury your head in the sand.
I get it. But remember that analogy we talked about earlier? About seatbelts? You wear one not because you're expecting to get into an accident, but because you want to be prepared just in case something happens. Think of these steps as your digital seatbelt.
Okay, so What are some specific things people can do right now to protect themselves?
Checking your credit reports regularly is a great place to start. You can catch any suspicious activity early on. And of course, be super careful about those phishing emails. If a link or attachment looks even a little bit off, don't click it.
Better safe than sorry.
Right.
And if a company asks for more personal information than seems necessary, don't be afraid to push back. Ask why they need it and how they plan to protect it.
Exactly. You have the right to know how your data is being handled. Don't be afraid to ask questions and advocate for your own privacy.
This DISA breach really raises an important question for all of us. What responsibility do companies have to proactively safeguard our data? And what can we as individuals do to push for stronger data protection measures?
That's the core of the issue. It's a shared responsibility. Companies need to really step up their cybersecurity game, but we also need to hold them accountable.
So it's not just about individual actions. It's about collective action, too.
Absolutely. You can write to your elected officials, support organizations that advocate for consumer privacy, or even just start conversations about these issues with your friends and family.
It's about raising awareness and making our voices heard. Our data is valuable, and we deserve better protection.
Exactly. You have more power than you think. Your voice matters and your choices can make a difference. Remember, it's a collective effort.
Well, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the DISA Global Solutions data breach. We've covered a lot of ground, but as we've seen, this is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
It's an ongoing conversation, and we encourage everyone to stay informed, be proactive, and never stop asking questions.
And as always, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.